All right, so this video, part 1 of 2, by the way, Happy New Year, is about the modeling, lighting, texturing, all the things that go into making the 3D aspect of that final image. And the second video will be about compositing. As you can see here, I'm using, well, maybe you can't see, but I'm using Blender. It was a bit of an exercise as well for me to familiarize myself more with the lighting, because, you know, lighting is the same everywhere, but finding the buttons, figuring out the differences between different render engines. Cycles is quite a bit different from what I'm used to, which is Arnold and Redshift. So I took the opportunity in this project to really get to know, really drill down and understand different render settings, sampling, clamping, all that kind of stuff. But we'll get into it. So to start out, I'm going to start with where I started, which is not in Blender. I started first on a piece of paper. So you see here a few sketches from my sketchbook. And this is the one of focus. So, you know, I'm not very precious with my sketchbook. It's not, oh, it has to be beautiful. It has to look so great. Everything has to be perfect. No. I literally just use it kind of as a brain dump. So you see even sketches, writing here and there, different things, just to kind of empty my brain of all things kind of art. So once I had this idea, I like the idea of, as you see here, halo around the rock. Like, that's pretty cool. So, I pretty much started there as a sort of mental prompt. You can see the composition is kind of generally there. I wanted more of an angular shaped rock, maybe with some, not necessarily cross-hatched texture, but some, you know, planes and angles, things that would make it interesting. And the reason I settled on, and at this stage, by the way, I settled on sculpting the rock. And the reason why I settled on sculpting the rock was because it's much easier to art direct the shape when you're sculpting it versus when you're going to like Megascans. Well, you know, Megascans kind of doesn't exist anymore. It's on Fab. But, you know, when you're going to different marketplaces and trying to buy things, and sometimes because maybe the mesh is decimated, it's hard to adjust the shape without stretching textures or destroying details. So I figured, let me just, you know, from soup to nuts, let me just create this thing. So the next thing that I did was I started gathering reference. This is a website called cosmos.so. I actually found out about this from this one video by Eliznats, I believe her name is. And she gives all these cool different alternatives to Pinterest because, you know, Pinterest is still a very great tool. I like it a lot. I use it quite often. But sometimes it's a little difficult to, you know, it's difficult sometimes to find certain things without being sidetracked. And I found Cosmos very, very nice. So here are kind of the images that I pulled together. I pulled together just whatever I thought looked cool. Didn't have to be necessarily related so much. So for example, for this, I was thinking, ooh, the texture is nice. For this, I was like, ooh, maybe I could do something like this for the background. And then for this, you know, you see the texture of this stuff here. Again, pure white background, interesting. This one as well. So just pulling together ideas that I thought were cool that had elements of stone and you know, kind of this, like, this is well, it's gone now, but that was a beautiful shot. The little bits with rocks in there. I also knew that for the halo, I wanted to kind of explore some ideas. So I pulled some of this along with the floating rocks. Like maybe I could do like, you know, an orbit in that way. For textural detail as well of the rocks here. This one I liked a lot. This one. And, you know, I didn't go so crazy when I felt like I had enough options on both ends of the spectrum. Both the end of the spectrum where, you know, oh, it's very close to what I think I want. And other things like, oh, I never thought about maybe doing something like this, but it could be cool, you know? Or, you know, all right, this is interesting. That's interesting. Then I also made another board just for the orbit. And I like the, you know, kind of this rainbow light, how do I say, spectrum, refraction sort of look. And so I grabbed that, but then I also grabbed different things in this vein, a couple little ideas maybe for animation. I did indeed make a mistake because I did not plan out the animation from the beginning. And that led to me kind of spending too much time iterating in the end, like, oh, I want it to move, but how much and in what way? So if I were to do this project again, I would draw up some storyboards and maybe rough out some previs in Blender and really just kind of solidify what my plans were. But this is the kind of stuff that I was pulling together just for ideas. Because again, at this stage, it's not about getting exactly what you want. It's about having a root idea and using that to kind of generate further ideas and kind of just, really, really dig down into what it is that you want to make. Like, this could have been cool. Maybe even this, This isn't even necessarily an orbit, but I thought, hey, maybe something with how the width of the lines are, the unevenness, and how the light disperses, which I kind of ended up using that in the final image, as you saw. Some more images, some more ideas as far as lighting and mood and what I wanted to evoke as far as, the look. So a few of those different things there. This one is not related. But, so from there, once I had that started, I had an idea. Instead of just jumping in based on this, because this is a little too scattered for me to really pull anything from, I use this, I use PureRef. Now, I don't know if you know this, but PureRef is a really great tool. You can pull all your reference in that you want, and I used it to curate. So I have this on my desktop, and all of the images that I thought were like serious contenders, I even put notes. This is great lighting. I like this very much. I like the kind of subtle red, as you saw that carried through. I liked the idea of that glow. For me, it didn't make sense for it to go through the stone for my needs, but I liked that darkness. I like the light. I like the glow of this. I like, the background of this, the angular shapes and the smoothest shapes. So I just pulled together those of from the Cosmos. I now see why they call it Cosmos. But yeah, I pulled it from Cosmos and just really grabbed the ones that I thought were most related to what I wanted to make. So once I had that all set and sorted, I went straight to Zbrush. And I didn't do any sort of time lapse or anything, but I'll walk you through my process. So I started with a sphere. This is not the sphere, but just as an example. And, just started using I don't remember my short key for this. There we go. So I have a quick menu here. And, the first thing I do is rough out the shapes generally. So, So I ended up, just pulling the sphere here, bringing it into the shape that I want it to be. I'm doing this with a mouse. I have a tablet that I use, so it was much more fluid. You pull it out and then decimate it, and until I got something close to this, right? What I did then is I brought that into Blender, took a mesh, shrink wrapped it over it, just to get a cleaner topology. So I took a quad sphere mesh and shrink wrapped it on top. Then I brought it back in here to sculpt in the different levels of detail. So if you've never used ZBrush, don't be intimidated by the menus and all that stuff. It's a bit to get used to, but once you do it, you fly through it. So this was kind of the lowest subdivision level, and you can kind of see it's still kind of a somewhat dense mesh, right? So I sculpted progressively layer by layer. And one thing I learned from one of my favorite guys here, his name is Neil Blevins. He talks a lot about contrast. So this is very busy, but this has areas of rest and areas of visual detail. So this is something that I always try to keep in mind when I'm sculpting. So even if you see this, like, yeah, it's a rock. It's gray, but it looks better, as you know, in the render. But you see that not everything is equally detailed. Like you have, you have like this fine detail kind of everywhere, but it's very light. It's not very, it's not super duper deep. But then you have like a lot of this stuff here, but it only travels across certain portions of the model. The rest is relatively smooth. So this is interesting. This is calm. Interesting, calm. And then you have here these big shapes, and of course this is one big shape, but in that big shape you have secondary shapes here, 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 different parts here, here, and then of course you have like these kind of shapes here, but then you have of course the fine detail. And again, this is something I learned from reading Neil Blevins' blog. I'll put all these things in the description. But he talks about primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes, which just is like, third level shapes. And so even here, it's a perfect graphic. You have these big, then you have the ones that are slightly, smaller. You have the tiny little bits. And he goes through some really, really great examples showing how effective this is in organizing whatever it is you're working on. See here, even in photography, lots of details, stuff that breaks up. No detail, pretty much just black, and different looking detail. So he goes through it in very practical, very sensical ways. So it kind of helps you, if you've not heard of this kind of concept before, internalize it. I highly recommend, just even starting out or experienced, I come back here every now and again just to review, because this guy he really knows his stuff. You may be like, oh, I'm not interested in concept art, so why do I care about this stuff? Because he primarily does concept art. But hey, information is information. As they say, game is game. If you can learn from it, it's good for you, and you could always learn from someone else. So once I was done sculpting in Zbrush, I got it to this level. I did the front and the back because I figured I'm not sure if I want to rotate it slightly or, what type of animation I'll be doing. So let me just do, at least on the back side, some simple sort of sculpting here and there. Nothing too grand. So what I ended up doing once I was ready is, of course, I exported out the mesh at the lowest subdivision, right? And at this point, I had also put UVs on it. So that was a done deal. So I went and see if I remember where to export it out. Multi-map exporter. There we go. So I did vector displacement and I did normals. Sometimes I do ambient occlusion, cavity, because sometimes if you're going to put this into, for example, Substance Painter, or Mari or 3D Coat to texture it, it's good to have those maps so you can just kind of apply them and use them to drive certain colors, darkness, lightness, etc. Even if you're doing a more procedural or hybrid workflow, i.e. you're painting, but you're also adding some sort of noise breakup. Sometimes these maps can be helpful. I exported it out, I believe, at either 2K or 4K. I don't remember. And when I was going to, before I exported it out, because you have to, here we go. Preferences, import, export, vector displacement. Here is the important part. You have to set up the flip and switch, or the tangent flip. So for Blender, it is 47, 27. So those are the two things you have to change. I learned that because I remember in Arnold, we were first switching from, at the studio that I worked at, we were switching from some other render to Arnold. We had to determine, okay, we're getting a lot of sculpts from ZBrush, but they're not looking right. Like the details are not sitting in the right place. What's the deal? And so the deal was, you have to dial in these values, or else they won't come out the way that it should. You start having issues. But someone here on the Blender Artist forums, let's see if I can find his name. Somebody down. Oh yeah, this guy, this gentleman or lady, I'm not sure. BWSAB. They discovered that it is indeed 4727. I tried it, worked perfectly, no issues. Here are the settings for vector displacement. You want to keep them kind of like this. So I exported out those maps. Once I had that sorted out, I then just exported it out. It does a really great job. The Z plugin multi-map exporter exported everything out I needed. And then at that point, I decided, okay, I've brought it as far as I can in this program. The sculpting is, for all intents and purposes, done. Let's see what I can do as far as lighting and shading. Okay, so I have an older version of Substance, but that doesn't matter. You can use this not just in Substance, actually. You can use it in, any program, PBR, otherwise. So you see here, I took that original, just regular sort of gray model and really kind of spiced it up with some color. Some roughness, some different things here and there. And let me just bring it back all the way down to what it is, right? So we start with our basic, no color, no shading. And here are the, here are the UVs. I just kind of did a cut around the perimeter. Nothing fancy, just very simple. I always try to put these seams where I don't think that the camera is really going to catch it. So even here you see, where are the seams, right? Can't really even tell. So that's good. You want that, because if it's like cutting through the middle, sometimes you have to do that. But if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. If I was doing something like UDIMs where I'm breaking it up into multiple tiles, maybe it would be different. But because I'm not, I didn't. So first thing I started was just that breakup, just getting that bit of breakup here and there. So, using a mask and, blurring it slightly, but just to get inside of those cavities. A little bit of darkness, because that's where a lot of dust builds up. That's where a lot of organic matter builds up. That's where, if there's acid rain, it kind of hits those, hits the outer portions. It kind of wears it down and makes it smooth, but the inside is still, it's got all that grit and stuff sitting in there. Then I added just a little bit of detail here, and this is primarily just in the normal map, right? So I took the normal that I had exported out from Zbrush and just applied it here, so I can see what I have already. So if I need to add some breakup with a bump map or some additional normal stamps or something in Substance, I know what I have there, so I'm not doing double work. I'm not overwriting what I've done already. I'm just adding to it. In this next layer here, I start saying, let me see what color might be good. So I get just very, very light. So the good thing about layers, you can always add on top of those layers more things as needed. So I just got a very light gray around here, some, the light gray from before, but then getting some little bits of brown here. So you can see that masking. And this is the, let's see, if I can hide the mask. Toggle mask. There we go. So I just threw on this very basic, kind of almost a clay mud sort of color, but then put a mask on so it only covers certain areas, certain select areas, to give it a little more breakup. So you've got the gray rock, but even if you go out in nature, you don't ever see a rock that's just, one shade of gray. There's always little bits of subtle color variation. So I started implementing that in. Same thing here, a little bit of breakup here using a mask. And the mask just kind of, again, if we look at it here, it gives us some breakup. And then, throw a grunge map on top, tweak the levels so that the darks are, moved around. The lights are more brighter, so you get more effect on certain areas. So when you see white, it's a lot of effect. When you see black, it's almost none of it is there. It's very subtle, but as you layer these things on and on, they really, really do add to the final look. Here we got even a little bit more. And this is just like a concrete material, just a substance material, concrete bear. And I put it on. I kind of brought down the opacity a bit and changed it to overlay, just to get a little, as you can see here, we're getting a little bit more detail, a little more breakup, a little more kind of oomph, for lack of a better term. And then at the end, I just put on just a black layer and multiplied it over the color, just to make the rock even darker, because I was feeling it was too light. It was too it wasn't really like kind of the color that I wanted it to be. So I added a little bit more darkness. So that's that for the substance file. Very simple. Nothing really out of the ordinary. So what next, right? So what I did next is I brought it finally into Blender, right? And I got to work. I created this. It's just a very simple torus with a very, very narrow diameter for the torus, the cross section of the torus anyway. And I made into a makeshift halo. I show you the shading. Yeah, it's very simple, actually. I just I painted a very basic map. Let's see if I can show it to you. So I was trying to do something like this, just using the gradient in Blender. I kind of gave up because it wasn't giving me the control that I wanted. So I went into Affinity Photo and just really quickly set up a gradient from here to here. And if you go in, you can see just the UVs of this. Because I wasn't doing something that would be deforming a lot, something that needed to be super have high fidelity in that way, I didn't worry about stretching so much for the UVs. I just set it up and put it together and was like, great, here we go, we're good. If you look, let me see if I can just show. It's very subtle, but you can see like, okay, there's a little bit of red there. There's some yellow, and then the white is on the inner part. And so as you look from part to part, from the back, the color is slightly different. I just wanted some subtle variation. It's an emissive map, so you're not going to get a whole lot of, detail anyway. You're not really going to be using this necessarily in a way as you would use like a texture like you would here. So, but I just wanted some visual variety to work with, because sometimes doing everything in comp is quite hectic. I'm not a comp first guy. Some people are really amazing at it. For me, it's a supplement to my tool set. Primarily, I work in 3D. So if I can get it done here and get it 90% of the way here, I'll do that, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do it in compositing. Though that is a good challenge. It can be fun, but lean into your strengths, they always say. So for here, we have this. So what I did first was I brought in different maps that I knew I would need. So, we have the vector displacement map here. We have AO, so ambient occlusion. And let's see. Where is the here we go. And of course the base color. And turn this off real quick. The base color, which you just saw that we had painted in Substance Painter. So it comes in, I throw it on here. Normally I would also maybe put on the normals and stuff, but depending on what I want it to look like, how I want it to go, I may opt for something more procedural. And that's kind of the point. You're working with what works best. Sometimes you bring it in from Substance and you're like, okay, this could work, but maybe I need to tweak it a little bit. Then you go and do that. Essentially, you're trying to figure out what works. You're problem solving in real time. This is the roughness map. So those things that are black are very, very shiny. And the things that are more white, those things are kind of more dull, right? So this is what happens when they all plug in together. But we'll walk through it. I'll just show you kind of how I set things up. So we have the ambient occlusion, put it in a color ramp, and just kind of push those darker values to give us more contrast. Additionally, I have this noise texture, which really just gives overall breakup, because I felt that what I got out of Zbrush and even what I was doing in Substance wasn't strong enough. So I just grabbed a noise texture, just, here are the settings. Again, don't worry about memorizing them. I just tweaked them until it came out looking how I wanted them to look. Color ramp this too to kind of get rid of some of that darkness, because as I went down, I realized that it needed to not be so so crunchy, as it were. Added this to another noise texture, which was clamped as well. Again, clamping just kind of adjusts the value so it's not so intense, because sometimes you get like really high peaks and really low valleys, whether in roughness or in bump or anything like that. And if you want to avoid that, you can use the the color ramp to kind of just compress it. You can use curves, whatever it is, whatever your flavor of the week, so to speak. Additionally, I had grabbed, as I mentioned before, this cavity map, and pipe that in here. Did a bit of a remap, so it brought even some of the details down again. Multiply them together to get kind of this map. It's very, very, it's a lot of detail. It's kind of just all over the place, but that's what I want. I want overall breakup. And I take that. Some of it was color data, so I just went RGB to black and white. And then I plugged that into the bump as a height. And, you want to really dial up and down the strength, because sometimes the strength can be too high and then it just looks too crazy. So I added it just as a subtle, subtle breakup all throughout. So you can see a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. Nothing so aggressive, but every little bit counts. Every little bit of detail you can bring in adds to that realism, adds to that stylization. So when you're going for something and you're like, oh, it looks too smooth. Sometimes getting an overall noise and just building it up layer by layer until you get something that really kind of catches the eye, or that really makes it go from 0 to hero is very, very useful. And then, once I have the bump, I plug that into the normal map and we're done with that. It's actually a very simple shader, right? There's some other things down here. Oh, no, we already went through this. Yeah, that was the noise and everything. As you can see here, I needed to clean up my my comp. There's a few things here that I didn't end up using, like the original normal from Zbrush. That ended up not being useful. Or I think this is let's see what we got here. This is something. Either way, clean up your shader graphs, because then you'll be like me, like, what is that? Why is that there? Better to just get rid of things that don't need to be there, like this one here. This is a height map, just regular height from Substance. Never used it, didn't need it. I'll get rid of it right now, actually. So there's that. And I zoomed off screen, which is great. There we go. Okay. So yeah, by the way, the reason what I'm doing here is I'm just hitting Control Shift and clicking, and that kind of solos, quote unquote, like whatever you want to look at. So if I only want to look at this, it'll solo it, this, and that's available using the Node Wrangler add-on. So make sure that's enabled. All right, so that was the shader setup just for the rock, for the halo. That's what we got there. If you want some additional information on layering procedural, there's a really, really good free course on YouTube by a gentleman named Arvid Schneider. It's from him who I learned the idea and the concept of layering noise to get good looking textures and such things. I'll also try and link that in the description for those of you who are interested. He uses Maya and he uses Arnold, but it's universally applicable. As you can see here, I did exactly the same things that he will do in just layering the noise in order to get like, a more detailed, a more interesting, a more, visually intriguing, how do I say, shader, So when it came to rendering, the first thing I always think about, the basics of lighting, which is you want your key light, which we have over here. This is like the brightest light more or less in the scene. It's like the hero light. It shows like that. It's like that, if there was no other light in the scene, it was just that, you could kind of identify what it was. And then you have the rim light, which kind of just separates it from the background. So you got like, all this sort of stuff just along the edge and spilling over a little bit. You also have something called the fill light. And the fill light kind of keeps these areas from being too dark. If you want to darken them, if you want to lighten them later on, that's totally fine. But it's very important to have it like well lit, because if there's no light information there at all, then it's hard to, like what is even the shape of this section? It's just flat black. You don't want that. So adding a little light there to kind of fill in that information so the viewer knows what they're looking at, very crucial, very essential. So even here, See if I can show you. Let's go straight to, let's just get rid of every light in the scene, right? Can I do that? Whatever, let's do this. So there's no light. This is emissive, so that's why it's not black like this. But if we just, if we turn on the key, boom, wow, right? Looks great, it's stunning. So even with just that light, the image is just, it tells you a lot about what you're trying to do as far as mood, as far as the subject matter. You're already kind of a huge way there. But, you know, it's not enough, so we throw on some fill, right? It's almost kind of like it's adding a little additional detail here. Very nice, very nice. And then, of course, we have, so we have this thing called, sometimes I use more than one light for a specific purpose. So for the rim, I wanted a little, it's hard to see, but there's like a little bit of detail like around here that otherwise is not lit by the rim, you know? So I added this additional rim, and then this is the main rim, so you see here. And you'll notice as well that this is a warm color temperature. So this is all white, right? Like the light is all white, but this is more of like an orangish, yellowish white. And this is more of like a slightly bluish, purplish light. And even just that slight amount of contrast really kind of amps it up. It really makes it so much more interesting visually. So, you know, if you think that it's nice to have like the main light be a bright light, like think about maybe the sun, maybe think about like, you know, the sun is kind of, it has more of a yellowish, whitish glow. But then, you know, of course, reflection from the sky makes it a little blue sometimes when it bounces off of different things. So if it's a lower light and maybe it's bouncing, maybe make it blue. Maybe if it's a nighttime scene, it's more of a bluish light because, you know, the moon, the darkness of the sky, such things. I also additionally added what I would call a bounce light. So if I had a plane underneath here, the lights would interact with that. It would hit the plane at the bottom and bounce back up to brighten this bottom section because look, this is so dark. And stylistically, if that's what you wanted, perfect, no problem. But for me, I wanted like a little bit of light information there to describe the shape and the form in that area. So I added something called a bounce light and just gave it like a little bit of a red, you know, a red bounce. And again, this is just to differentiate, kind of quote unquote, this quote unquote, sorry, I speak too fast. To differentiate the red bottom from this kind of blue and again from this kind of yellow or white. So you know that, you know, okay, this is a different vibe, a different mood, but it all plays into the greater whole. Then, of course, I added another bounce because I felt like it was getting a little too red, so put a little bit of white in there just to kind of brighten it and keep it from being so red and make it a little more on the pink or the salmon sort of side. So that was my mindset around lighting. And of course, as you're planning, you can look at all kinds of reference. As mentioned before, I took a lot of inspiration from this one as far as lighting direction. This as far as like darkness and mood. This I got the red from. It might actually be a part of the stone, but I said, hey, lighting, you know? This one was also formative in lighting. This was interesting, but it didn't translate all the way through. So all throughout the steps I'm doing, I'm coming back and I'm checking in PureRef, like how do these compare to this, and how does this compare to these, and what elements do I like that I want to steal and put in here? Well, not steal, but you know, in the way that artists steal, as far as, you know, using reference to you know, inform your choices. So, you know, this pointy bit, this pointy bit, this pointy bit, this pointy bit. You know, none of them are exactly this. But at the same time, you can clearly see the inspiration, you know. You can clearly see the inspiration. You know, some of this detail, you can see like the striations here, a little bit here you can see. You know, so you're pulling very, very specific details that you know, that you wanted or that you liked from the reference and putting them, you know, into your work. You know, you're not copying, you're not saying, oh, I did this, my own original idea. No one's ever done a rock like this before, and then copying just one image, because that's just copying, which is fine if you're doing studies. It's fine if you're exploring how did they do that? How do I make it the same way? But then when you're claiming it as your own, you have to then, you know, remix. You have to make it your own. You have to add your own inspirations, your own experience, your own style, you know, or else you're just copying someone's singular work. So, you know, something to be mindful of as well. So we had our lighting, we got all that done. So one of the things that I, for a very long time, had issues with sort of dealing with is optimizing the render, because sure, you can have it run every frame a day, but if you're making an animation, that's not really like optimal. And if you're iterating, you're going to run out of patience very quickly. So let's take a look at the settings here, the render settings. So as you can see here, and of course, this will vary based on your computer, what you want to do, all that kind of stuff. For me, Cycles, GPU, I've got a NVIDIA something or other. That's not the real name for it, but it's an NVIDIA, and it's pretty good. Just get rid of this. Yeah, just so you can see. So this is for the viewport, which is what we see here, and this is for the final render. Sometimes it's set to 4K as far as the samples, like 441, something like that, like some high number. But for me, when I dialed it high, it didn't really make a huge difference. I'm not doing something like, refractions where there's a lot of noise. The most noise I got was kind of in here, but I fixed that in a different way, and I'll show you that later. So kept the max samples equal to the viewport, 1024. And these parts I left normal. I turned off the noise because when you're doing animations, sometimes it gives you weird artifacts, like things tend to look a little strange. If I was doing a still, I might leave that denoise on because it does speed things up. But also sometimes if you have fine detail like this, it can kind of think it's noise and kill it. So use your discretion. Based on the results you get, sort of move accordingly. Light pads, I dialed up and down a lot. This by default and this by default have some value, I think, generally on. Maybe not volume, but transmission certainly. And since I have no glass materials, no plastic, nothing translucent, transparent, I dropped it to 0. I don't need it. Glossy, I have things that are kind of shiny, some specularity, so I kept that. In fact, I boosted it to try and get rid of some of the noise and some of the shinier areas, like, see these little dots here? That's, specularity. And then of course the diffuse, which is just what you see non-shiny, just plain color, and how it reacts to light. Yeah, I just I left it there. So here is also clamping. So in order to get rid of some of the fireflies, I made sure that I clamped the light. So essentially, if it's at 0, it just does as many bounces as it feels it needs to calculate the light. But sometimes that leads to some unresolved areas because it hits the limit of, maybe 12 total or 10 total or whatever. And it goes, it's still not resolved, but I've got to stop now because I'm at 1024 samples in this area and I've done all my bounces. So, what am I going to do? So this clamps it. So any light that's higher than 30, direct light, or any light indirect, like bouncing off something and then bouncing back, that is, higher than 10, it gets cut off at that value. So it can't go any higher. I had to dial this up and down because if I don't, let me show you what happens. I don't know if it's that obvious in this, but let's see. If I go like maybe 0.2. Yeah, if you go like kind of low, it cuts off too early. And so you get you can't get those beautiful bright highlights. Everything is just a little muted. So, I think 3 itself is even actually pretty good. But for this one, I decided, hey, 30 should be all right, So I set it to 30. Indirect light is by default at 10. Left it alone, I'm not doing anything with caustics. Left it alone. Here in film, I turned on the background to be transparent so that I could put in a background later instead of having to fight the black background. So that's what I did. I believe that's all as far as settings. One other thing that I recommend you do, and I learned this from, what do we have? Yes. This guy, Andy M. Visuals. So I have a habit of scrolling through YouTube Reels or YouTube Shorts, whatever they're called, either way. And I came across this guy's video, and he talks about this one concept, which I was always so irritated with cycles because I'm like, the blacks are just not black enough, like I'd be getting renders like this. Well, not like this exactly, but let's say this. Getting renders like this, which is not bad, but I'm like, everything is kind of gray, and I never really knew why. And in that video, he's like, make sure you, if you're not having an HDRI, come in here, set the background strength to 0. And now you get those beautiful, like, dark areas, you know? So, before, after. It's a subtle difference, but if you're trying to get, like, pure dark areas in your scene, it can drive you crazy. You know, for me, I was cursing cycles and stomping my foot and throwing my hat in the air and kicking dust and all that kind of stuff, but this really helped out. So, shout out to him. His channel is pretty great. He's got some really good tips about making things look good and art directing your lighting. So check him out, definitely. So I did a little bit of animation on this. Let me go back to the main layout. Just a little bit of animation. And the reason why is because I wanted, you know, I looked at the render in its static form and I was like, this is interesting, but maybe a little motion will help. And so I parented these things. I think you can see it here. Let's see. Okay, that is nothing. All right, yeah, here we go. So, I parented the rock here under this locator, and then I animated the locator itself. Go to the graph editor. I put a very, here we go. Yeah. So on the Z location, you know, I put a modifier. Yes. Built-in function, a sine wave. So it just kind of just bobs up and down. Kind of just gives the effect of floating. And I found where it cuts off and just made it a looping animation. You know? Simple. Nothing too crazy. Then for the Y location, which is towards us and away from us, I gave it a little bit of just a little bit of noise. So it kind of moves forward and moves backwards, just subtly. And then, did I do anything on the rotation? No, I don't think so. All right, so that was the basics of that. And again, I always parent things to an empty. I don't animate directly on this if I can help it, because, you know, maybe I have to bring it in from another program, or I have to animate in more than 2 or 3 axes, and that can lead to gimbal lock. So to avoid that, I'd prefer to stack locators, or what are they called? Empties, sorry. I'm calling them what I'm used to calling them, but I'll stack like empties, group one into another, make one rotate, make one translate, so I can easily, you know, sort of rig it. If I'm doing something complicated like a character, just use the bone system. But for simple things like this, I figure, why not just use an empty and you know, and just make it work in that way. So that's what I did. I also animated the halo ever so slightly. And oh yeah, that's what this is. Here we go. So, you know, where is it? Oh, that's why. Okay, this is nothing. I don't even know. See, this is why you gotta make sure you clean up your outliner once you're done, because that does nothing. But this, again, I have a just a rotation. It's very subtle, like you can barely see it, but it kind of just wobbles a little bit, you know, just to give it a little bit of life. Not very noticeable stuff, but if it's dead still, that is like uncomfortable to notice. You're there like, why something feels off, but I'm not sure. Chances are something needs to be moving. Either the camera is moving, like a push in, or like a slight rotation or something, or the elements in frame should be moving. But just a dead, like something just absolutely not moving at all. Like even in nature, if a deer isn't moving, maybe its ear is twitching, maybe its front foot is moving a little bit, or it's sniffing with its nose, or its muscles are tensing, and we notice that as humans. So when we see a scene and it's supposed to be moving, but it's dead silent in some areas, we're gonna pick up on that, and it's gonna be kind of weird, you know. So yeah, that's what we got there. So when I was preparing to export this out as far as render layers, yes. So view layers here. It's only one scene. I didn't do multiple scenes. I didn't need to. It's very simple. I always do the combined. I did direct, indirect color, direct, indirect color, and emission because this has emission. But I didn't do transmission because there's no glass, no volume, so no volume, no environment because I'm not dealing with the background any at all. And I'm not doing ambient occlusion. I did it at first, but I realized I'm not using it in the compositing, and it's taking like maybe an extra 30 seconds to calculate. So I said, if I'm not using it and I don't need it, get rid of it. I don't have any shadow catchers. I don't need crypto matte, and the reason for that is I just do regular IDs because again, I only have 2 objects. And what does that look like? Well, let me show you. Let's do a quick little render. Should go quickly. Or quick-ish. There we go. So, what we have here, still building up, but I think we can still look. Or maybe not. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, good. So we're getting the diffuse direct, indirect, the color. So this is the gloss or the specularity, indirect, color. This is the color of all the shininess everywhere. You can see the breakup we did really helped out. So it's not just one black or one white. It's got like shades of gray. So some parts will be more poppy than others. Some will be more reflective than others. And when you're doing any sort of organic work, you want that. You don't want it to be like smooth like a bottle or, or like maybe a piece of plastic. Even that would have a little bit, but that would be smoother. But this, you want all this breakup and all this roughness. So our painting and everything else really paid off nicely, right? The emission is just this, right? And the idea is this, right? So way this works is that you can go into your compositing software of choice and you can just say, all right, make the green one mask and make the red one mask. And you can then use it to kind of adjust your colors on only this or only on this. Very useful. I realize now that the reason why I was still going is I had a render for only the halo because as I'll show you when we go into the compositing side, there was a bit of issue with when it terminated behind, I wasn't getting like the glow. So I had to render it out as separate and then add the glow and then use this mask, the ID, to just cut out it so I could get the glow in a natural way coming like it was all the way around the rock. So that's that. And probably the question may arise is, wait, how do I know which, how do you say, like which channels of these do I know that I need to do? Like I mean, sure, I picked these, but maybe there might be a time where I don't need to pick glossy or I don't need to pick diffuse. How do I know? Well, it's actually fairly simple. And we can know this from the shader. So we're looking here. Let me pull this up again. Right? So in the shader, what do we have? We definitely have diffuse because we have a base color. And base color is pretty much just the diffuse. So if you have a base color plugged in or applied, you need diffuse. We have a roughness. And the roughness is the glossy. So if you have any sort of roughness, a map, or even if you just have like a, you just dial it up like this or whatever, then you're probably going to need to bring the glossy in. If you have transmission, any value, any weight on transmission, you should probably bring in the transmission. If you have something plugged into the volume or any sort of a volume for lighting in the scene, you're going to need volume. Emission, same way. And these are kind of just if you need them, right? If you guys need another video, because I know it's kind of getting long, talking about the ID, let me know. Be happy to put one together. It's very simple. It just implies you put in an AOV output here, set the color, and if you wanted to, just grab even just a roughness, one of these ones, you could even just plug it in here to the color and give it a name, add a channel here, and you get that as a render layer if you want. You just have to make sure you add it here and then you put the name in here. Very simple. So after that, I exported out it as a multi-layer EXR, put it here for every view layer. So yeah, so that's that's pretty much the end of it. Thank you so much for watching. Hope it was helpful. And again, in the next video, we're going to go through the compositing in Fusion. Thanks and have a great day.